All right, everyone. Welcome to the episode 18 of the HC Biz Show. We got two folks joining us from AHIP in Las Vegas, Shahid Shah and Mr. Wareflow, Chuck Webster. Really happy to have you both here. Glad we have a good connection between Vegas and Buffalo today. We can hear everybody, no static, so that's good. Just a quick setup on the tweet chat. For any of you who didn't see the kind of the backstory of what got me thinking on this, John Halamka had a couple of posts out this past week. So I was just kind of pondering about where innovation is going to come from over the next 5-10 years, and how regulation plays into that, and how that we've heard it before, how that can have an impact on groups' ability to innovate. And he listed a set of challenges that he saw out there, which we can touch on as well. And I read this and I was like, perfect. This is great fodder for the HC Biz Show. It's definitely the type of stuff we like to look into. And I'm kind of going through the comments at the bottom of the blog post, and somebody chimed in, not verbatim, but it was working at a huge healthcare IT vendor. I could tell you the thing that we're missing is we've lost track of the fact that we're actually trying to provide care at the end of the day. It's we're all distracted by these regulations. We're all distracted by the things that we're trying to accomplish, and we're missing the essence of it. And not that I think that keeping that in mind is important from a general just humanity standpoint, but that's not what this show is about, and that's not the point that I tried to make. Is that we are so distracted by regulations and by this kind of innate desire to innovate, whatever that means to people when they're daydreaming about it, that there's a lot of things that we're just straight up missing that are right in front of our faces, that don't require innovation, that aren't held up by regulations, that we're just not taken care of. And it was like this instant flashback to a visit that I went to a hospital, visit a friend, elderly gentleman, probably around 80, fell on some ice, broke ribs. He was okay, but he was in a lot of pain. And when I got to the hospital, he was waiting for his pain meds. And he had been waiting for a little while, and the nurse rolls in, and she's got this gargantuan cart. It was like AV cart from high school that you'd see with the 29-inch Zenith on it. The computer's bolted to it. I assume security policy, want to make sure that it's hard to steal computers. But the key was she had a barcode scanner, and she had to scan his wristband, and then she had to scan the tag on the cart or something on the cart before she could give him the pills. The cart or the thing had a cord, and the cord was too short to reach his wrist. The cart was too big to get next to the hospital bed. So this 80-year-old guy with the busted ribs had to lean forward to get his wrist scanned and to get his pain medication. It was just completely absurd, and you could tell the nurse was flustered by this. She was put in a very bad spot. Obviously, the patient wasn't happy about this. And it's like anybody who would sit there and look at this situation would say, you need a longer cord, or you need a smaller cart, or you need something like it. It's a very easy problem to solve. But we're just, the point was we're so distracted by everything that's going on and everything that we're trying to accomplish that we're letting things like this slip by. And that was kind of what inspired the topic for today, that first question, and wanted to kind of dig into this topic a little bit. And, introing that to, I'll head off to you guys and shut up in a second here, but that's how I ended up with Chuck on the show here. Said, you're always talking about workflow, you're always talking about these things. That seems like a prime area where there's probably some things that you see out there that you can identify as, I see these all over the place. These are not crazy complex to fix. These are things you could do relatively easy that'll have a noticeable impact. Doesn't have to be disruptive innovation every time, but it's a noticeable impact. And you actually came back to me at the perfect term, which you just put over there. So I will hand off to you guys and let you give your thoughts on that, and then we can kind of take the conversation wherever the heck it goes.
Shahid, you or me?
Maybe just a couple of more preparatory words here. And we'd love to hear from Chuck telling us a little bit more about the workflow side on that relentless incrementalism. So one of the challenges that I see, and one of the reasons why I'm here at the AHIP Institute conference is we don't really see, one of the things that innovation really requires is for someone to take responsibility and accountability for something. So if you were to look at that episode that you just mentioned, which is both heartbreaking as well as unfortunately realistic and probably very common, is that there's probably nobody in the hospital that says that's my job to fix. So last week we were at Health Impact and we were at Disneyland in Anaheim. And one of the things that really impressed me was any problem that we wanted, someone immediately took responsibility for it. This is my problem. I'm going to help you work through it. I'm going to walk you through it. And so when we look at accountability and responsibility, they're not the same thing, but they're very, very important in innovation and especially the business of healthcare. So if we were hoping that things are going to change, we have to say who's responsible and who's accountable. And so that's why, like at AHIP here, what I'm hoping to hear from payers is we are willing to take responsibility and be the adult in the room. We're willing to take accountability for cross-institution kinds of things for our members. Patients, of course, need to take responsibility for their own health and making sure that they're connecting up the pieces. But if you look at providers or if you look at constituents like an imaging center or a lab or something like that, it's really hard to figure out, well, if I don't like the flow of something, who is going to actually be accountable and responsible for that entire flow? And until we have that, we will have these kind of complaints that, this doesn't work and that doesn't work. I mean, we're at a nice hotel here at the Wynn in Las Vegas. And if I have a problem with the room and I don't have someone to go to and say, this is a problem, and then somebody takes that problem and walks it all the way through to completion, that'll be very tough. So, Chuck, what have you seen, both with respect to healthcare and maybe what non-healthcare industry is doing to really own this workflow problem? Because it is all workflow, right? So how do you fix it?
Well, this is sort of like, if you walk up to a broken record and you say to that sentient broken record, you say, I want you to be like exactly like you always are. That's exactly what I'm going to do. Okay, I'm going to say the same thing I have said over and over for almost 2 decades. And that is this. Let me just pull out some of the phrases that both you and Don Lee mentioned. Taking responsibility, tracking workflow, who is responsible, who's responsible for the whole workflow. You mentioned hospitality, how those tasks don't fall between the cracks. Workflow technology, workflow management systems, task management systems, business process management, taking responsibility. You actually literally assign responsibility in a workflow system. So you know who's responsible. And if a task is not completed, it is escalated. So who is responsible for the entire workflow? Well, that's one of the problems with workflows. Workflows have multiple stakeholders, so you need some kind of almost virtual proxy agent that's keeping track of the relationships between all the tasks. Who's responsible? What tasks are blocking what tasks? Logistics. I mean, that's my industrial engineering background. Essentially, what these systems do today is what I did 30 years ago on butcher paper. I had a clipboard, and I had one of the, and we had time clocks all throughout, and the patients would walk around and they'd slip these little pieces of paper under the time clocks, and we'd collect all that timestamp data, and then we try to recreate what the workflows were and how we could change things. So now I do want to mention the relentless incrementalism. I want to get back to that, but also you mentioned other industries, and it happens that I happen to be married to a top hospitality consultant, customer service, leadership, ran consulting out of a major hotel chain, very involved in customer service. And the reason that in those hotels in which you have a problem and you report it and it gets fixed every time is it's not just the people are really well trained. They have got the systems in place to support them. I call that the system behind the smiles. Actually, the phrase, if you Google "system behind the smiles," it's actually 3 decades old. It's a guy who created a very successful chain of luxury car dealerships. And then he wrote a book about marketing to luxury brand, quality and consistency. And there's a chapter in there called The System Behind the Smiles. The smiles, that's the empathy. That's the face-to-face interaction. The systems, a lot of that is the nitty-gritty IT. The traditional IT systems in healthcare do not represent workflow. They do not represent who is responsible for the workflow. They do not track in real time the task state. They do not escalate. They do not make that all of those tasks across the entire workflow transparent to whoever needs to see that. Now, I should say this is my second AHIP, and I've been to many HIMSS conferences. What I do before every single of these sorts of health IT conferences is I search every single exhibitor website for things like process orchestration, workflow management, workflow engine. I cross-index that with like workflow and customer engagement to kind of see what some of the spin-offs are and their interactions. So there are about 11 or 12 companies out of the 200 or so that are at this conference that specifically mention business process management. If you look up business process management, some people define it as process optimization, the process optimization process. The process optimization process. So it's a meta thing. It's like the workflow of workflow. So the workflow is a sequence of tasks that accomplish some goal, such as bringing you a cold glass of water in your room when you want it. The workflow of workflow are the tasks necessary to create great workflow. Okay. In the old days, that was done by hand with stopwatches and calculators. And now healthcare in the workflow area is terribly behind other industries, including the example I cited. Now back to relentless incrementalism. I've got a blog post. It's an interview with a very interesting fellow named Scott Polanski. I bumped into him, and we had a lot of similarity in our background. He was pre-med. I was pre-med. He did kind of analytics and cost management. I have a pre-med accounting major. We both ended up kind of in the workflow end of things, and it's a term that he uses, and it's basically about chopping things up in little bits and proceeding a step at a time and being very, very persistent. Okay, so they have to. But here's the connection to IT. Here's a connection to IT. We have two major paradigms in developing large-scale information management systems in healthcare today. One is the folks who are accused of paving the cow paths. So they say, well, the problems we have is that you went in and you took bad workflow and you made it faster or more consistent. Okay, so there you got bad. So the problem was the bad workflow in the first place. The second realm is, well, no, what we need to do is we have to figure out and correct all of the workflows at once. Because once we only have one shot at this to implement all these workflows in software, and so but what happens is they don't understand it perfectly. They don't, and the user sabotage it. It's culture shock. Those are the big bang re-engineering failures. But there's but in a health IT world, in the IT world, in the workflow management world, relentless incrementalism is going in and automating the cow paths with a technology that allows you then to incrementally and systematically over time improve a wide variety of KPIs, key performance indicators, cycle times, error rates, consumer engagement, however you want to measure that. So there is my strongly held opinion. I've been saying it over and over again, and I appreciate Shahid for allowing me to say it again here from the America's Health Insurance Plans Institute and Expo in Las Vegas.
So that was great. I think maybe some advice, and this is a good discussion to have, is where do we assign that accountability and responsibility? Is that a customer service issue to say, okay, there's a leader? I mean, as we know, in healthcare, leadership drives these kinds of tasks. So if you have a CIO, his job is to install the EHR. If you have a CMIO, his job is to analyze the data coming out of the variety of different systems. Whose job is it to say that the analytics plus the EHR plus customer service plus the cold glass of water showing up in your room, are there the equivalent
of a chief workflow officer or the chief process officer? However, I don't, I'm not big into playing games. I like to track all the C3 and 4-letter acronyms, but that's what you're talking about. You're talking about someone who knows enough about technology, knows enough about the domain, and has enough political clout to understand that these workflow silos, okay, not data silos, these workflow silos can be connected up with technology that's been widely available in other industries for several decades. And I'm seeing a lot of folks, I've seen CEO job ads for CEOs and CIOs for hospitals and hospital systems that specifically say hospital experience is not only not required, it is forbidden. We do not want anybody from the healthcare industry as our president or CEO or CIO. Okay, because those folks are bringing in a variety of perspectives, and one of those perspectives is exactly how do you meld that digital software foundation with the sort of human workload, work performance, empowering, and the shortest phrase I've been able to find is this: the systems behind the smile. So the smiles, that's that great experience that the ultimate customer. The system is the nitty gritty. Well, guess what the interface is between the system and the smiles? It's workflow.
Right.
In other industries, if you have a problem like pollution, well, often you see pollution technology to help solve or manage the problem. Healthcare has a workflow problem. So why not take a look at workflow technology?
Right. Well, I mean, I think the argument that you would hear, which I do consistently, is, well, of course we already have a workflow system. It is the EHR. That is, I think, our core problem, because the EHR is a retrospective document management system. Should not be your core workflow system. But unfortunately, whether it's the vendors marketing it that way or CIOs who are new to this kind of technology, not seeing it that way. I mean, I think there's a fundamental gap of what a retrospective document management system does.
Electronic health records are going to be basically relegated to database plumbing with a really bad UI slapped over the database model, where the users are the workflow engines are now rebelling. And what you're seeing is a layer of workflow technology being laid down across. Some of, Fire will help in that regard, but you're probably going to see a majority of that are going to be other non-Fire APIs, because the Fire is going to focus on that sort of, the absolute essential clinical subset. There's a lot of other, especially time-stamped and task-related data that needs to be represented. But the thing is right now today, you can two workflow. There's literally a definition of workflow interoperability. This has been around for more than 2 decades. I know I talk about workflow interoperability a lot and pragmatic interoperability, but the definition of workflow interoperability was originally simply 2 workflow engines talking to each other. That's it. Okay, and people say, oh well, any 2 systems when they talk. Well, that's workflow. Well, yes, it's workflow, but it's not workflow interoperability, because the workflow engine, which is processing or executing some kind of representation of work or workflow, that's what gives you the flexibility, the transparency, and the ability to systematically improve.
Right. Yeah. So, Don, in your article that you cited a little while ago from John Halamka, there was a mention about clinical groupware. Mm-hmm. So do you want to talk a little bit about that? What sure. Did you think about clinical groupware, especially some of the stuff you guys are doing with ZenPRM? Let
me jump in on clinical workflow. When Halamka wrote that, I in turn wrote my own analysis of. He had 10 things. This is going back last year. There were 10 things that he saw needed to happen. And I said, well, this is how you would do all of those with workflow technology. And when I got to clinical groupware, okay, I went back through the whole history of, the phrase clinical groupware, which had a hype, and then it fell flat about 5 or 6 years ago because there wasn't any there, okay? The word groupware was invented in the early 70s. And within about 5 or 10 years, the folks who knew the most about groupware, who did the research that built the original groupware systems, basically lumped together about a half a dozen technology from shared calendars, email, and related things, but including workflow management systems. So he's absolutely right, but we need to drill down and say, okay, well, what's the best technology to implement clinical group work? Guess what? Today, the modern name is a combination of business process management and case management. And by the way, when I say case management, I'm not talking about kind of the traditional case manager, although there's a lot of what the case manager does that needs to be supported and enabled and automated that can be done very well with case management software. So the kind of technology on steroids that can do exactly what Halamka wrote about in the article that you cited already exists in other industries. It is indeed diffusing into healthcare. I think there were 111 of the 1,300 exhibitors at HIMSS. This year, I think it's about 11 or 12 that specifically mention this technology. So it is diffusing in, and we're seeing startups, and we're seeing a lot of enterprise initiatives that are starting to leverage this stuff. You're seeing folks who may business process management, for example, is widely used in the insurance and in the financial and in the human resources industry. So when that gets brought in the back door into a hospital or health system, because you can basically build an application from scratch in weeks with these systems, they're using a human resource application that's written on top of a BPM engine. And then they look under the hood and they say, wait a minute, all you did was draw the workflows and lay it out, some forms, hit a button, and there's the application. You didn't have to write a whole bunch of Objective-C, Java, or MUMPS code. And then they say, well, wait a minute, can we use that to do something else? And so Ottawa Hospital with IBM built a very interesting discharge management system, mobile, BPM driven in the background, and it kind of runs in parallel with their clinical systems. And so what's happening is this kind of technology is edging closer and closer and closer to the single most strategic point at least in health IT care, health IT these days, which is the point of care, the patient and the physician interaction.
Got it. So when Halamka's talking about this clinical groupware that you brought up here, and obviously you're well versed in it here, what specific use cases are we trying to solve here? Is this for like bundled payment type arrangements that we're seeing, where there's going to be a bunch of different groups involved in the care of a patient? And
I will shut up and let Shahid get a word in edgewise.
No, it's okay. So what I see, the ask is, so if we think about it, most CIOs and these guys are not crazy. It's not like nobody knows about these workflow systems. It was same as like 10 years ago when web servers first came out. Everybody was building their own web server, building them into their applications, et cetera. And then people started separating these into middleware. And I think we're getting to that point. But really, if we just go and talk to department heads and say, you need a workflow system, that's never the debate. Is that we need.
No. Here's the but what we're doing right now, okay? Only the now is not the time to stop being blue in the face about this stuff. Now is the time to be even bluer and more iridescently blue in the face, and brighter and with a bigger face. I mean, this is happening, okay? So I'm sure that Shahid, you've heard of outside-in development. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I mean, this workflow technology is ideal for that. You still need IT, you still need health IT to run the legacy transaction systems and provide access to the data. The outside-in development are these workflow systems, this business process systems, where you basically can quickly spin up a new health plan product and generate native mobile apps that the members of the plans can use and deploy them through the cloud quickly. And so so folks who aren't necessarily programmers, because you have the low code, less code, sometimes even no code approach, where people who really understand the workflow, really understand the domain, are in direct interaction with the customers and the patients, can actually build in a matter of weeks the systems to enable them to generate those smiles that I keep talking about.
Yeah, so if we look at a real approach, because what we were talking about on HC Biz here is how do we make this happen today? And I think that approach of saying that, like in the case of groupware, what they're really asking for is one place. I mean, whether it's a Slack for healthcare or a Jira for healthcare, if we look at these other technologies that have hidden workflow underneath, but have exposed a very nice user interface where people can do self-service, they can spin up a new group. The old IRC from the 1970s is what Slack has modernized today. And if you look at that same kind of model where you say, how do I hide the EHR underneath, but put my workflow layers on top. I think, Chuck, that's a very, very good point, is take the new self-service requirements, low programmer requirements. What are the things that are not being automated today on the periphery of clinicals? Because once you talk clinicals, we get into this rigmarole and crazy discussion about MU1, MU2, MU3. Well, I can't touch this because I need to upgrade my EHR. So helping these guys with their problems means helping them adapt to technologies at the periphery. And I think the outside-in model here works well. But that groupware question that, Don, you asked about, what I believe John Halamka is talking about is the kinds of technologies that we as programmers take for granted. I mean, the nice thing about us as programmers is when we have a problem, we solve it ourselves. We don't wait for somebody else to go solve it. Of course, poor nurses and doctors, et cetera, can't always do that. They don't have armies of people and friends that are just willing to solve problems.
Right.
So whether you look at Twitter or you look at Slack, those were internal problems. Jira was an internal problem that people had that they solved and then made available to everybody else. And now physicians know how to do that with clinical things, right? They know how to do that with surgery equipment and other areas, but IT still seems a little outside the norm. So if we say to help imbue this idea of workflow, when we build our applications, let's not go build them from scratch. Here is a healthcare informatics platform which is built on top of a BPM engine.
Okay, let me interject here. I have my post that I wrote in response to Halamka's post. And
are you talking about the one from this last week or earlier?
No. He wrote this. No, but I'm sure it's in the similar. He talks about clinical groupware here, or groupware, and this overly hyped phrase was quickly derided and disposed of about 5 years ago, if you recall. Okay. Meanwhile, lightweight cloud-based groupware for managing small groups took off outside of healthcare, such as the ones that you talked about. Groupware will indeed emerge in healthcare. It won't be called clinical groupware, but that is exactly what it will be, because the hype, basically, we burn that phrase, just like EHR has been received a burn notice. The difference this time around is that groupware will be organized around longitudinal shared care plans. You can think of these as similar to work plans, workflow definitions, process models in workflow management and business process management industries, except for the most part, the humans right now are the workflow engines executing these plans. So what you're going to see is people adding to these longitudinal care plans and adding to these groupware systems, basically smart agents, except these smart agents, I have a master's in medical artificial intelligence, and the smartest agent, the most practical smart agent we have today is basically a workflow engine executing a model of workflow that supports a user or a patient's work. Groupware organized around workflow plans are part of an ongoing evolution from traditional data-centric EHR and health IT applications toward a more workflow-centric and process-aware systems based on workflow engines, process orchestration, and communication, intercommunication, and a federated sort of cloud infrastructure.
So, Chuck, maybe what we need here is a reference architecture speaking to three different groups. Group A is someone who says, well, I want to do it the right way. How do I do it the right way? And we have a good set of techniques to say, if you're greenfield, here's how you do it the right way.
Shahid, I lost you on Group A. What was the? I had my.
So Group A is a forward-leaning CIO who says, I'm greenfield. I want to do everything the right way. Okay, how would I put that together? Right. And then we can say, okay, here are your, you can go with BPMN 2.0, don't look at 1.0, et cetera, and say, okay, this is how to do it the right way. Group 2 is an EHR vendor, and there are hundreds of these guys that are struggling to get to MU3 because there's more requirements for adaptive workflows, more requirements for analytics, more requirements for data integration, et cetera. And so we say, okay, well, if you have a legacy system, how would you apply modern workflow technologies? And here's a reference architecture for you doing that. And then Group 3 is the one, and all of these guys, what I see happening is when you look at MACRA, CPC+, EPM, these ideas that multi-institutional workflows matter, that longitudinal care plan that you so correctly referred to, that third group says, look, I'm moving into value-based care. I'm going from my 8 or 10%, whereas the average contracts that are value-based today, to my 20 to 25 to 30% by 2018, 2019. I need cross-institution multidisciplinary care planning, what is the best way to do that? And the nice thing is these are reference architectures that we could come up with in a discussion and say, we don't necessarily have to make it an official standard like a HL7 or something, but the idea that FHIR will solve this is at best an incomplete answer, right?
Absolutely. Okay, all right. Shahid, I'm going to go back and I'm going to practically transcribe everything you just said and write a blog post about it. Forward-leading CIOs familiar with sort of the modern workflow technology, not BPM1, but BPM2 or 3.0 or whatever. EHR vendors under the duress of MU, but are now forced to have more adaptive workflows and adaptive workflow data flows for their analytics. By the way, if you go back to about a year or two before CCHIT, workflow technology, workflow engines, customizable workflow, transparent task management was actually in the original CCHIT draft that went out, and then it was taken out. I'm sure there was one person, I wasn't the person, but there was one person who insisted to put it in there in the early draft, and then the consensus cut a lot of stuff. And then the third thing you mentioned was the cross-institutional care planning and workflows. And so 2014, I wrote that blog post about pragmatic interoperability. So you've got syntactic interoperability, which is basically the structure of things, and can you move them across the wire someplace? You've got semantic interoperability, which is the literal meaning of this code in this system the same as that code. Pragmatic interoperability is when you send a message from one system to another, does it have its intended effect? Okay, that is right out of linguistic pragmatics. I'm all but dissertation in computational linguistics from Carnegie Mellon. I took courses on this stuff. Pragmatics is, so we talk about syntactic interoperability all the time. We talk about semantic interoperability. We don't talk about pragmatic interoperability. And the best way to implement pragmatic interoperability is with task and workflow management system software, because pragmatics is all about using context to interpret an utterance, okay? Well, the best context we have are the models of work and workflow that we can create, okay? The goals, the tasks, the subtasks, the real-time status relate, well, this has not been accomplished, that's blocking this task. And that has to be made available across institutional boundaries, okay? Now, standards like FHIR absolutely play a role, okay? But right now, you can go out and pick a half a dozen modern, in the cloud, business process management platforms, and they all have APIs. And these APIs are not just for pulling data out of them. These are APIs that allow you to pull entire models of work and workflow out of, so if you want to actually inspect a schematic of the workflows in general, the design workflows in another organization, you call this API, the process ID, and it knows the design template ID, and you can pull that over. And also, not only can you pull this data out about workflows and task state and workflow state, you can also kick it off. You can also make a REST call into a BPM engine and say, kick off this workflow. And then you can query it as to the status of that workflow. Now, I would rather deal with 5 or 6 really well documented, really well designed APIs than a single standard API that's crap. Okay, and so what I would argue for that forward-leaning CIO, if whoever, you can't boil the ocean. You got to start with your most strategic partner. Okay, and it's basically, I was talking to a hospital CIO, and he says, we just got our own BPM system, and the reason we had to get our own BPS system is that the HIE got their own BPM system. Okay, so I need a BPM engine to talk to their BPM engine. It's a little bit like my lawyer will have a lunch with your lawyer. Okay, there's a proxy. Okay, EHR vendors adapting work. Yeah, that's at one time there were some of the early electronic health records actually were built on workflow management systems. Okay, but what the problem is you can't build a great EHR and a great workflow management system at the same time with the same amount of resources. And then meaningful use came in and basically shifted all the resources over to the EHR side, and workflow management technology was just one of many innovations that probably would have happened without meaningful use. So it's not the only victim. And then finally we get back to number 3. This, this is we need to do all. I'm kind of stuttering here because there's what you said just triggered too many neurons. But so I'll pause.
Yeah. So if you think about the way that we can solve these is as if you're a leader in the space and you want to do something about it, you look for a locomotive that is already moving in a direction, and you put your car behind it, right? Mm-hmm. The workflow system will never be the locomotive. Macra is a locomotive. Meaningful use is a locomotive. There are things that people have to do. And if we can say, look, if you're an EHR vendor and you're wondering how to get from MU2 to MU3, requirements 7, 9, and 18, drop in this open source workflow system, or start using IFTTT, or start using some modern workflow.
If I could interrupt you, but to ask you a question, and I don't know what the state of it is, but a year or two ago, we interacted with about some very innovative stuff that you were doing in the area of workflow automation, workflow orchestration process, and compliance. And so I don't know where that is in terms of, but I mean, some of what we talked about seems a little bit like we were talking about dropping in, dropping a workflow engine or a workflow system into the interstitial layers. Or are you free to kind of expound on you know what I'm talking about, and can you elaborate?
Yeah, I think really the way to look at this is, and what I'm thinking about from a healthcare, the business of healthcare problem. From a business perspective, the only technology solutions that get implemented, deployed, are those that have business drivers, right? We know 4 or 5 major business drivers are coming down the pike, especially value-driven care, although it's a little bit too generic for it to be meaningful from a road mapping perspective. But if you look at EHR vendors, which I mean, I talk to these guys at least 2 or 3 times a week, different vendors, and they're all currently looking for a couple of major things. One is, what do I do to my roadmaps to make sure that I can meet MU3? And they're saying, what do I do to my roadmaps to make sure I can do better in analytics? Like we have garbage terms like pop health, as if that's meaningful, right? Pop health is nothing more than a CRM on steroids to make sure that you understand what your inflow looks like of customers, how you're supposed to take care of them over time.
And customer relationship management, by the way, is process aware. It's got customizable workflows.
Right, but what you need, I think,
absolutely,
is to step back and say, if the driver is pop health, how do I solve that using generic tools? Like if it's CRM plus another system with a workflow engine in the middle, awesome. Let's create. This is a question that I've been asked a number of times about.
Jimmy Vanagan
how do I do
was here,
analytics?
If Jimmy Vanagan was here, that's exactly what he's a solo practitioner. He loves what he has. He has an electronic health record. He has a CRM system, patient portal. The two really don't talk much. I mean, there might be some labs that go back and forth. And his nurse is really she's swiveling back and forth, and that's unfortunate, but apparently it really works well for him. And so that's that he's done that. So we don't. It is not the. I have a video. I interviewed a solo pediatrician in 2008. And his EHR was based on a workflow management system, so he could change all the workflows and track all the tasks in that classic way. And we never mentioned business process management to this guy, but he got a whiff of it, and he went out and he studied it, and he realized that what he had was an EHR built on a BPM system. Okay, and he went to HIMSS in 2008 because he won the HIMSS Davies Award. Okay, and he talked about electronic health record, workflow management, and business process management. And so I shot a video. Right after this, I'll shoot the video over to you guys. And here's a solo pediatrician who's saying that he has developed different, he not a programmer, he has developed separate workflows for the asthma kids and the camp physicals. And this workflow can kick off another workflow. And that's 8 years ago. And he's a solo pediatrician. So when you're talking, Don, about easy and impactful, okay, you know what? Just if Health IT would just pull its head out of the sand and look around in the world, in the great, big, glorious world where not invented heroism doesn't hold quite as much sway. People say, well, you're talking about the impossible. Implementing a whole new system, a whole new foundation, okay? Well, no, these systems out there are so sophisticated that they can basically compensate for and intertwine with and fit underneath and lay over top the legacy systems that we have spent so many billions of dollars shoving down physicians and hospital throats.
Right. Yeah. And I think the point, though, is we're not trying to convince people that workflow tools are the end all and be all. What we need to convince them is that almost every problem that we're going to see in healthcare over the next few years, especially as we move to more outcomes-driven care, is a level of integration and a level of technology that has been solved in other industries. Now, as you start to look at your healthcare business and say, okay, I'm doing population health, break population health down and say, what does that really mean and how do other industries handle it? If I'm doing care coordination, what does that really mean and how do other industries? And then we can create small reference architectures that say, Pop Health is nothing more than PRM plus workflow, and here's the reference architecture. Here's the open source you get. Here's the commercial thing you can buy. And then people say, oh, really? I can just go get that today? Say, yes, absolutely. But I think the idea, we shouldn't really be trying to convince people that workflow is good or bad. Everybody in healthcare has been doing workflow for decades, centuries, in fact. I mean, everybody knows how to do that. How do we digitize and automate it? Now, one thing we know how to digitize and automate in other industries is inside our institutions. We're not as good, even outside of healthcare, in inter-institution workflows. We're getting better. We have more technologies. We have more capabilities. And that may be the saving grace, because next generation outcomes-driven care absolutely mandates multi-institution, multidisciplinary capabilities. And you can't do that without these workflow engines underneath. In 3 or 4 years ago, I wrote a 7,000-word series on Introduction to Business Process Management for Healthcare, and it covers patient safety, usability, interoperability, and population health. So I just went to the population health section, and this is what I wrote: the best technology from which to create care coordination platforms is workflow technology, aka business process management, and sometimes called adaptive or dynamic case management software. In fact, when I drill down on most sophisticated, scalable population health management and care coordination solutions, I usually find a combination of two things. Either Health IT has in sense reinvented the workflow technology wheel, or they have built their system on a third-party business process management engine. And I could list right now 4 or 5 of the, and they're still kind of they exist. They're not out there and in use, but they have considerable enterprise buy-in. Okay, I can list right now 4 or 5 population health interoperability platforms that all, there's a box. If you look at their architecture, okay, and then you search their technical discussion forums where they're collaborating, where they are leveraging a business process management engine, suite, or platform.
This is an area where, going back to, I was out at the Health 2.0 conference in October, I felt like the care coordination in general was one of the hottest topics out there. So there are a lot of people going after this. Who's doing it right now? Who's got a product at market or a product coming to market that either of you have seen that you think has some promise in being able to solve that problem? The multidiscipline, multi-institution, who's kind of the front runner there right now, and what are they doing to solve this problem?
Shahid interacts much more face-to-face with a wide variety of health IT vendors than I do. I spend most of my time actually in the BPM industry, the healthcare, the workflow technologies, because I'm trying to learn what they're doing and then bringing it into healthcare. Okay, and there is a kind of there is a, I don't want to say it's a fork in the road, or maybe it's more of a thesis, antithesis, synthesis issue here. And that is, on one hand, folks are looking for prepackaged software that will solve all their problems. Okay. And on the other hand, they don't realize that there's a lot of low code, workflow, process aware, workflow savvy software out there that allows you to create from scratch relatively sophisticated systems that can then be continually improved, and you can add features to. That is, you don't have frozen workflow. Okay, and so I tell people to and they're just starting to show up at HIMSS and AHIP to look for these really, really good BPM companies that are starting to come into healthcare. I mean, I could list them here, but I don't want to, this to turn into to become overly promotional. Okay, but the ability for someone who understands the workflow to change that workflow so as to fix a problem almost in real time. Okay, as opposed to going back and have to recompile and redeploy and retest and retrain. Okay, is an extraordinarily positive, virtuous cycle that is almost completely missing from health IT and needs to be brought to health IT. And to go back to that relentless incrementalism, I think I did read from it. They're not out to solve world hunger. Okay, there are quick and easy fixes to create the new, for example, health plan products that don't take years and millions and end up with software that you can't change. These systems are intrinsically changeable, intrinsically malleable, intrinsically transparent. And in many cases, you push a button and they also generate native apps on a variety of devices, including mobile devices. So you've got great potential user and because we're at AHIP, patient member experience.
Yeah, I think you touched on a really important point there too, is that folks do want the out of the package solution, and they, I think, may want a solution that is flexible and can grow with them, but they also want somebody to make it go, to actually kind of, I'm picturing like a good workflow platform, BPM platform put in place that comes along with a service arm who has experts in monitoring workflow and telling you what it needs to be. Because nobody wants.
No. I got you're exactly right. What the typical model you're seeing is that forward-leading CIO, number A, on that list that Shahi provided. The light bulb goes off. Okay, and they say, okay, we're gonna pick some low-lying fruit here. Now, hopefully not flying fruit, and we're going to we'll build a system and see how easy it is to build, and it's going to solve a problem, and then other people will want to do the same thing. Okay, we want access to that if that'll work. And so often what you'll see is folks who work for the BPM company, they have basically people who develop applications for verticals. Okay, and that person will go and they'll spend a month with the organization to build the system, okay, and also do technology transfer so that the folks in the organization can, and the thing is the people that work, it isn't a programmer in the organization. It's more like almost like a business analyst level person can build and maintain these systems. And then if they have a problem, they go back to the vendor. Okay, but one of the problems is these BPM companies keep losing their employees. Okay, because the systems, and then they say, okay, we want to hire you to, and that happens, and there's a good relationship there. So a lot of these BPM systems companies are developing, I guess resellers of a sort, value added folks, and those fill a similar kind of role. Okay, and you see this in health IT. I mean, you see the folks who used to work for Epic going and helping install or to tweak Epic. But what you don't see in health IT yet, and will eventually come, is the person like I just described earlier, that is, who really knows the BPM stuff, really knows the workflow management platform, okay, who also is sort of solely tied to the vertical and really knows the stereotypical workflows, okay? So it's a very quick study for them to come into a particular sub-vertical in healthcare, like health plan or provider or whatever, and say, okay, well, I already kind of know what the general workflows are. I see your workflow specifics. I know the tool, okay? So let me come back in a week and show you a functioning, working prototype. Now, the great thing about these BPM systems is, the old saw about throw the prototype away. Okay, so you write the code, you build a prototype, people like it, but then you made a lot of shortcuts and crappy spaghetti codes, not maintainable. So you got to start over. Okay, you don't have to do that on a BPM system. Okay, you build a workflow application, you draw out the workflows. It works great. The security is great already. The thing is, these systems have all the, they practically indemnify you. I mean, in a technological sense, because they have PhDs from Carnegie Mellon, Stanford, and MIT who design the security layer in the BPM system. Okay, and you as the application developer just have to call their stuff. Okay, you don't have to develop your own. Okay, and that is going to be that over the next 5 or 10 years, people who know the workflows and know the subverticals and know the BPM or workflow technology systems that can customize it and come in, that's going to be, I think, the single greatest growth area in health IT.
Yeah, so in the last few minutes that we have left, let's talk about the issues, right? I'm a huge believer in workflow. I've implemented them for years, and I've even built a couple of EHRs on top of workflow engines. So I'm a big believer. The problems that I see
as have I.
Yeah, and so both of us have. I think that so the problems for anyone who wants to do this and says, "Okay, I'm sold. Now let's get ready to go." Mm-hmm. One of the big challenges that you're going to have is finding people who know both healthcare and workflow is something that you're going to have to make sure you work out from an HR perspective, right? Get the right people. And we often can, like, if you say, okay, give me a pool of Java developers, give me a pool of, let's say MUMPS is still hard, but let's say it's easier to go get a guy who knows a horizontal tech than a vertical.
It's deja vu all over again. Remember 10 years ago, you couldn't find anybody who knew clinical and knew IT. Now you got lots of people who know clinical and IT. Guess what? They don't know workflow, and that's part of the problem.
That's right. So make sure that, as you're starting to embark on this strategy, how do you make sure that you have people there? The second thing is
because this supports what you're saying. Okay, I mean, I know a major medical trade association who said, we're gonna help our members with workflow. So I have an industrial engineering degree. So they said, could you tell us who we need to hire? Because they were going to get an industrial engineer, health management systems engineer kind of person. And I said, okay, well, that's fine. Industrial engineers, they know about workflow, they know about statistics and KPIs and so forth. But make sure that person can program. I mean, they've taken a couple of courses in because that person can turn around and and builds. We then give them you don't say you have to build this from scratch. You then give them these sophisticated workflow platforms. They're sufficiently technical in a kind of a digital grease under the fingernail sort of way. They're used to actually tinkering and building. You need to marry that to those workflow smarts.
Yeah, I agree. And so make sure that before you embark on this, look at your HR strategy and how you're hiring. And much of that has had to be updated because of MU and the push to EHRs anyway. The second thing is, as you start to look at the tooling, there are lots of good tools out there. The problem is that those tools aren't going to work right out of the box to connect to the one thing that you want them to, which is deeply into your EHR. So this is one reason why many CIOs actually that I know personally have started to look at traditional horizontal BPM tools, but then can't really use them because there are no connectors, et cetera, that already know how to talk. So this is where the guys like MI7, Redox, Sansoro Health, Fire, and other kinds of technologies come in. So when you say to yourself, well, I'm ready to embark on the business side, and I know that I need workflow tools, you have to make sure that you get the integration strategy done really, really well. And this is whether you're talking about EHRs in healthcare or SAP and PeopleSoft in other industries, this is a struggle that all BPM vendors have. So ask that question of them and say, well, how do you do this really, really well? So number one is it's a human resource problem.
Human resources, personnel. And number two is the ability to connect into that the enterprise legacy IT structure.
That's right. And the third problem that I've seen is people don't really understand what their workflows are. So they don't have an idea of what are their workflows versus workflows they're getting from protocols. Like there's a combination problem when we say in clinical, a workflow is not the same as a protocol, and a protocol is not the same as workflow. Workflow is an emergent property, unfortunately, of most hospitals, whereas a protocol is a predefined property that hospitals would like to follow. The distance between them, unfortunately, is fairly high, and you have to solve for that as you're starting to look this out, because it's the same problem we have when we install EHRs.
So, have you heard of process mining?
Yeah.
Have you heard of process mining? Well,
sure.
in 2008, we took almost 1 million data points, time-stamped events, task events, from I think 9 very busy pediatric practices, very large practices, and I found bottlenecks. Basically, process mining is you can take time-stamped data, okay, and run it through. It's like data mining, except that what the output is a workflow diagram, and it's annotated in various ways. And you can say, okay, show me the 3 practices that have the shortest cycle times, and now compare their workflow models. I mean, workflow is an emergent property. So this reaches into that data and doesn't show you the protocol, what people think is the workflow. It actually shows you the actual literal workflow. And people say, no, that's not what was really going on. And you say, well, okay, talk to each other. And they said, oh yeah, that is what's really going on. And then 2012, at the Society for Health Systems Process Improvement Conference in Las Vegas, associated with HIMSS, I presented, I think, the first process mining of EHR data. Okay, 2012, and I will shut up right now while I go and I find that link.
So, Shahid, to your first point on the HR stuff, I think that it's also important that, like we said, don't expect to find a system that's going to solve all your problems. Don't expect to find a person that's going to solve all your problems either. And you can find, the examples out there of where people have taken these multi-discipline approaches to establishing workflow. And there was an article I read going back a couple months, and it was one of the University of California, UC Berkeley, Santa Clara, one of them. And there was an ophthalmology group within that university that had a team from Toyota come down and teach they didn't have them come in and look at their workflows and say, please tell us how to improve our workflows based on your understanding of all of these, the concepts of lean and Kaizen and all that you guys are using at Toyota. They had them teach the clinical staff the principles that they used to improve work in factories. And then the clinical staff turned around and used it to improve their own internal workflows. And I don't remember, there was some specific efficiencies that were gained that sounded pretty impressive. I don't remember numbers or anything like that. But the doctors and the clinicians themselves improved their workflows. They changed the layout of their offices. They changed where different people were working based on the things that they learned in these principles. I can share that link out too. I'll take a look for it and pop the link out for you guys. But I thought that's a really good example of, if you can't find that person who knows the clinical and knows the workflow and knows the tech, you're probably going to have a hard time finding someone that's a master of all those. How do you find, the master of the clinical who's good at working with other people and good at sharing ideas, and then go find the other 2, put the 3 of them together and come up with some process that way?
Last HIT SM tweet chat was Mark Graben, the lean workflow guy. And okay. My blog post about that was lean healthcare needs business process management. And the entire post, which I will add the link here, was basically how the lean people are representing these various aspects of work and workflow with various kinds of statistics. But the problem is that so much of work today and workflow today is mediated by software. So unless you can actually then turn around and make the software do what you want, and then use that software so it's instrumented, so you get an exquisite, sophisticated, exact what you want variety, the data necessary to make the judgment about where the bottlenecks are, or where the rework is, then go and you change the rules that are being interpreted by the workflow engine. And it was very interesting. I mean, I will have to say toward the end of the tweet chat, Mark Graben tweeted, What is workflow technology? And he put it in quotes, scare quotes. So here's a top lean guy. Now we had a very good back and forth there, and so I have a master's in industrial engineering. I did lean before it was called lean quality. It was 2 years on workflow in manufacturing, applying those ideas to healthcare. And I also have a master's in medical informatics, artificial intelligence, where you represent declaratively these processes, and then you interpret them with a variety of, it doesn't have to be a workflow, but you represent something, and then you have something to interpret that representation. That is how a lot of traditional medical artificial works. Of course, machine learning is a very interesting different animal today. And so there's just an incredibly great fit, because you get these, we were talking about low code, or people who don't have to be programmers who can then design their workflows. Well, those are the clinicians. So you get the clinicians involved in the lean, and then you get them turned around and you get them to design the systems.
Yeah, that's the best way to get their buy-in too.
Look, Google citizen developer. Google citizen developer and see what you see out there. That's what we need in healthcare. And I don't mean someone, God bless them. I did it myself. I mean, I don't mean someone learning Objective-C and writing apps, okay? But giving them the tools so that they can do professionally at the level and scale that health IT and healthcare needs today. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about this workflow technology. That's the tool that we're giving them. And there's an incredibly perfect fit between Lean and BPM.
Yeah, totally agree. So Don, you should take us out.
Sure.
We're hitting our hour mark.
Yeah, we are just past the hour mark. So that was a great conversation. Thank you both for joining us. Lean's one of the areas that actually I plan on digging into in one of the upcoming weeks of HC Biz. Not sure on topic yet for next week. Shahid, you and I will have to nail that down offline. But I know in 2 weeks we will have the Doc Smitty on, and he will be talking about how he's currently using patient feedback that he sourced through his social media channels and the design of a new clinic. And that has a really interesting backstory at Cook's Children's Hospital in how they basically take a very agile approach to improving and taking on new processes within their workflows. And what's really exciting to me about it is the conversation around how they don't expect everything to work, and they have measures in place and safeties in place, and they have timelines in place so that they can know when it's time to pull the plug on something and try something new. So he'll be joining us in 2 weeks. I'm really excited about that. On the topic today, again, great conversation, and I'll share that ophthalmology link because I think that Chuck, you in particular, you'll probably get a kick out of that, the way that worked out. So the closing comment that I'll make is we started off and we said, who's responsible for these workflows? And, we've been coming at it from a very technical sense and a very business-oriented sense. One of the things that I'd like to see, and I think that will be beneficial to businesses as the model starts to turn and healthcare has to act more like normal business, is I'd like to see a non-technical, non-clinical person somehow able to accompany through and kind of observe. So I'll call it the chief observance officer or whatever you want to call it, who can go in there and it can see these short cord scenarios and, isn't blinded by or distracted by all of the other, regulations and things that they need to take care of in a hospital, but can just use common sense and just look at situations and point out, hey, that's not right. Or be the person that a nurse in that situation can escalate that to. Because one of my suspicions in that scenario was that nurse didn't have somebody that was the good person to go to talk to about that. So that's my parting comment. Non-technical, non-clinical observer of workflows who can just tell us when we're doing something stupid, I think would be really powerful. So,
Don, Shahid, thank you very much for conducting this series, which is up to 18. I always look forward to it, even if I don't get to come on like this and expound incessantly about stuff I'm obsessed with. And I've learned a lot about a lot of other topics. I remember the direct, you did one on direct, and it was very interesting. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thanks
thanks Don for putting it together. Maybe next week we'll do a follow-up on what we learned here at AHIP from a payer side. And that last comment that you made, Don, and I'll just to put a bow around that, is that federally qualified healthcare centers, FQHCs, are interesting because one of their requirements is that they have to have, I think it's like 51% of participation needs to be on their board from the patients that they serve. Which is fascinating. So let's assume we had that kind of participation in regular hospital boards, what would that do to the business of healthcare and to the care that is delivered if patients had that type of voice at that high a level within the organization? So it'd be good for us to just check out FQHCs and see, has that worked out for them, and are they more patient friendly, or does it really do anything? And this whole idea that consumerism and patient involvement, et cetera, may not actually make a big difference in the business of healthcare.
That's really interesting. I did not know that. That sounds like a show in and of itself. So I'll do some digging on that.
Great. All right, guys. Keep catching up, and so Chuck, we'll see you tonight.
Yeah, enjoy the show.
I'll try to make it. I'll be there briefly, but yes, thank you. I look forward to seeing you in person.
All right. See you guys. Bye-bye.
All righty. Bye now.